So thank you, Martha, for agreeing to have this conversation. Um, I actually the reason I wanted to speak to you is because so we're going to this conference in October at Cambridge. Movement is, and I wanted maybe to start with that. And how did you come to be such a meaningful part of this conference? And then maybe probably our conversation will take up all kinds of directions that I'm not sure we would know. Yeah.
Sweet, sweet. So you're referring to the Movement Is or Movementis Conference, which I just think is the most clever name. The further descriptor of the conference is called Brain, Body, and Cognition. And I remember being at a somatics and dance conference in Coventry, England. I think it might have been my second or third time at that conference. Um, and I'm thinking all of this is about somewhere around 2016, 2017. And I, I'll just say a little bit about the Coventry Conference because there are very few conferences in the world that are a place for people that are skilled somatic practitioners to come together. And truly, the three that I'm kind of thinking of that have been important for the field of the soma, the living body, of the somatic body-mind connection, have been some somatic psychology groups. So IHP, I believe, was the International Humanistic Psychology Group. And they had an early conference called the International Somatics Congress, and that was in the 90s. And then there really were no dance and somatics conferences until I think the 2000s, although a man named Bill Evans was teaching his training and I was teaching mine, body, mind, dancing. So whenever we would get our graduates together, you could call that a conference, but that's different than convening people from outside your own brand, your own style, and really being in dialogue. However, also in the 90s, the International Dance Medicine and Science Conference began. And they had some early conferences, separate ones, that were on the science and somatics of dance. And so we've got psychology, we've got dance science. Then at Coventry, at the University of Coventry, where they have a PhD, they started having international conferences. And when I first saw that one in, I think the call for papers was in 2007 or 8, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm working on a book on the somatics of dance and I should be at that conference. And I thought about, I think it was a journal that they even started with, maybe even before the conference. And it was called the International, it's called the Journal of Dance and Somatics. And Somatic Education, Journal of Somatic Movement Education. There are a couple different ones now. But in any case, that began my journey. And I happened to come then to a conference. I said that they took my, they put, I'll say it this way. I decided to take the first chapter of my book that was being worked on and turn it into an article for the journal of the Dance Somatics Journal. And it it got an award because they have 90 different journals under Intellect Press, and this particular journal is one of them. And they give an award to those people that have the most downloads. So I was one of 5 that had the top number of downloads on this whole field. The reason I'm bringing this up is because then I go to the conference, and they're very nice to have me and do some pre-conference workshops. And there, everybody's talking about this conference at Oxford. And I was like, what's going on? And it's like, well, there's this conference called Movementis. And we're all going after this one to that one. And I hadn't even heard about it. So I was missing something, which is unusual. It's like usually I know what's going on. And so I just kept track of it. And then it came to Harvard next. So that was its second Congress. And I started going then. And to their, um, we say, pride or just strength, they asked for feedback. And some of the feedback was there aren't enough women being plenary presenters. Lots of women at the conference, physical therapists, neurologists, psychotherapists, educators, dance educators, somatic educators. But they took it to heart. And I said that I was willing to volunteer in any way. And they put me on the research committee. And then I started, and I think it might have been a suggestion of theirs for me to do a panel that would bring together some of the top leaders. And by doing that, I started being one of the plenary leaders where the whole group is together versus a small breakout room, which both are great. And I love to continue to do both. So both presenting research or opinion papers or perspectives on somatics to neurologists, to physical therapists feels really powerful. And so we continued that from, let's see, we went from there, we came to Tel Aviv. And then after Tel Aviv, it was France. And then it was London. And then it was Prague. And now it's back to Cambridge. So three times in Britain. Kind of interesting. And I'm looking forward to actually meeting you in person there. So that was a long history story, but hopefully helpful that the somatic psychology field, the dance field, and now this field that's interdisciplinary, interested in movement, has been a place to introduce and develop thinking around somatics. So far, the somatic bodywork field probably has some representation, like at a massage conference or at a um, bodywork conference. But even though I'm very involved with hands-on touch work, I haven't noticed any conferences like that except the Fascia Research Society. And there's another one where I have, put in papers and stayed as involved as possible. Yeah.
It's really to me it's exciting to see that this cross-disciplinary type of work exists and invites um, somatic practitioners, educators into the realm of neuroscience and physiotherapy and rehabilitation, right? So we said body, mind, cognition, but sorry, body, brain, cognition, right? Is that the three?
Yes, it is. And remind me to talk about embodied cognition in a minute.
Right,
Mhm.
right. And I noticed also that one of their keywords there is also rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So for me, seeing that was really it I knew that I needed to go there because I find that a lot of the work that I notice that I'm doing with myself, but also with people who come into contact with me and do one-on-one work or group work. A big portion of this work is actually rehabilitation, because I came to realize that we can't do actually therapy before we do rehabilitation work. And it's interesting because rehabilitation looks differently and feels differently because every person needs a different type of rehabilitation and I have a lot of questions about it, in terms of how we can use actually elements from somatics and from paradigms that don't require rehabilitating something or changing something or fixing something, but rather being with what is. For instance, mixed abilities contact improvisation that celebrates what is and looks and listens to what is present rather than what isn't there and focusing on what's absent. So uh, I find that rehabilitation in its classical sense, let's say, is not as helpful as rehabilitation in the palliative sense that is supporting life. And I think that in that sense, dance, movement, any type of somatic work can be such a great addition to what we know already about rehabilitation. And maybe you could speak here about about embodied cognition. Maybe it relates somehow.
Yeah, it's perfect. So an outgrowth of the Movementis Conference in London, which was a few years before Prague. So I can't remember what year, but 4 years ago, let's say, maybe three. Um, I met Dr. Morris Bell, who is a psychiatrist, and he is on the faculty at Yale University in Connecticut, in the East Coast of the United States. And he was deciding to do a conference on embodied cognition. And he invited me not only to present, but to help kind of organize some facets of the work. So I proposed that we do something on movement and aging. And I had two reasons. One is I've developed a program called Moving for Life, which originally was for cancer patients. But because some of the symptoms of cancer are very similar to the symptoms of aging, because here you are attacking cells, killing them. So it's like a very fast death. Fortunately, cancer treatment is now moving the whole cancer diagnosis into more of a chronic disease because it is effective, but you still have to manage it. So we help people manage the symptoms that come from radiation, from surgery, and from chemotherapy, and from immunotherapies. So with that, we learn a lot about rehabilitation. And obviously, as a somatic practitioner, I have a lot of embodied experience about what transforms sensation. If we think about soma is paying attention to our bodies, well, what are we paying attention to? We're paying attention to body signals. Well, what are body signals? They are the soma speaking. Well, how does the soma speak? Through sensors in our joints and in our muscle tendons, as well as in our inner ear, as well as externally all the exteroceptors. So we have interoception and exteroception. And so I've been teaching a lot about that for the last 12 years and just bringing that together. And this is very important to mention that we have an International Somatic Movement Educator and Therapy Association. And I've been the president of it. I was on the board for 15 years, helping to develop this field of somatic movement education and therapy. And there have been conferences now with Ismeta, but Ismeta also helped fund us to go to Tel Aviv and do a panel on interoception because everybody was talking about movement more from an exteroceptive kind of perspective, like what are the movement outcomes? What can the person do? But less about how are they feeling and how does registering feelings and sensations impact the rehabilitative process. So Morris Bell invites me to come to Yale and be part of the organizing. I wasn't an organizer, there were founders and organizers, but be part of the plenary, but also the early dinners beforehand of everybody involved with helping to do some of the organizing of the conference. And there I met the Yale School of Medicine head of the Department of Physical Rehabilitation and Medicine. Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. There it is. Yale School of Medicine, School of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. And she has asked me, and I've just spent the past year doing a project with her using somatic awareness in helping surgeons to be more aware of their bodies while they're in surgery, and obviously during their breaks mostly, but encouraging breaks so that they can make choices in their movement, whether it's the fine motor or often we're focusing more on the back care and the special focus on attentiveness to the spine and which joints of these many vertebra are being articulated and which ones have compression going on them for, hours, if they have 14 hours of surgery going on. So, yeah.
So you introduced, if I understand correctly, you introduced the embodied cognition and somatic awareness into the medical and rehabilitative education. Okay.
Exactly. So this particular conference on embodied cognition had a lot of focus on cortical processes. Embodied cognition is very much about cognition and language, and you'll see it in philosophy and you'll see it in anthropology. How does language emerge out of physical experience? So there's an acknowledgement that our body is speaking in a certain sense. But there was really no, at that first conference, I wasn't aware, aside from the ISMETA representatives, our president at the time, our executive director, and our a couple of our members were there because I brought them in to do this movement and aging panel with a focus actually on Parkinson's disease and how, with our understanding of dance and somatics, or just somatics, we're able to facilitate another level of rehab. Now, in our field, we call it movement repatterning because, in part, and I think of Moshe Feldenkrais for this too, he was, in my understanding, less, and I did get to meet him in 1981 or 82. Um, he was less interested in just the physical rehabilitation and more the change of the brain and the heightening of intelligence. And so we all believe in the somatic field that by having cellular awareness, you're more intelligent because you're recruiting intelligence not just from one section of your brain or all sections of your brain, but from the entire body. So it's very exciting to me to see the embodied cognition world embracing somatics. I find them incorporating the ideas without using the term somatic. So I keep kind of encouraging them to bring it up because, as someone who's a scholar, and I have my PhD in movement science, it's called an EDD, actually, a doctor of education. Um, we often, again, a lot of that is more goal-oriented movement, accomplishing a task, and to really take the time to say there's something different when we are both listening to, let's say, listening to feelings, and feelings are both sensations and emotions. So incorporating that kind of level brings a kind of agency, which I'm now speaking in tribute to my dear colleague who was at the conference, the first one, the first international symposium of embodied cognition at Yale University. Dr. Glenna Batson. She's a physiotherapist and Alexander teacher, as well as an ideokinesis expert, and wrote books on neuroscience and dance in particular. And she was really interested in aging processes and graceful aging, but also agency, like being empowered, able to make your own decisions as you get older, being as in community for sure, but being aware of the need to not be babied and infantilized as an aging person, especially in the latter decades of people's life. Yeah, all of
Um,
this is part of embodied cognition. Yeah.
I wonder how this knowledge can be introduced into um, psychosomatic medicine. Um, I had I had the opportunity to have conversations with medical practitioners at the psychosomatic organization in Israel. And when I introduced to them the idea of the soma as the living body that incorporates everything, that incorporates both the senses and the feelings and the physiology. For them, it was a paradigm shift that a paradigm shift that
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
that they were not um, willing to accept um, readily.
Hmm.
So it's interesting for me because I find these things, of course, connected. Because when I see the rehabilitative practices, both in mental health and in physical health, when it comes to goals and when we like protocols and we say how long should it take for a person to stop being depressed, for example, or start um, I don't know, doing their own shopping, or right, or socializing, or starting a relationship. So I find it very stressful. I find it unhelpful. I think that if a person um, realizes, especially while we're in Israel, right? So there's a lot of both physical and mental health conditions that are caused and psychosomatic conditions that are caused now by the wars. And and I'm thinking how unhelpful the goal-oriented medicine is for the process of rehabilitation, or for the process of feeling this agency that you're speaking about. It's not necessarily an old age agency type of thing, but it's definitely an agency that needs to be retrieved and owned for people who feel that they lose themselves, that they feel that they need time to maybe grieve who they once were. So I'm curious how you look at these issues and yeah.
Uh, could you pause for a second? Do
Sure.
you want to be here? Because I can move into that room. What I love about what you're saying is just that we all have our identities and our self-definitions. And it's what you're doing is opening up a conversation that is very dear to me, which is even the word somatic. I mean, it I've been involved in this field before we called it somatic. And then I was interested in becoming a dance movement therapist because I too was interested in going deeper with my clients beyond the physical education, if you will, of the body that comes from the various systems I had learned, which were exposure to Alexander and Feldenkrais, but complete training in body mind centering and in directly with Irmgard Bartenieff in Laban movement analysis from her perspective, which was this 500-hour course, and then also her own Bartenieff fundamentals. So we now call it Laban Bartenieff movement studies. And so plenty of somatic background, but then it wasn't called somatics. It was just these were these different learning systems. And the word when I do lectures on somatics and what is soma and what is somatic, I often talk about some confusions because, for instance, soma can just be interpreted as body, just like the body, and not necessarily the living body or the body that feels itself. And soma cells are one thing that differentiate it more. But before that was understood that there were regenerative cells in the body, we literally uh, anatomically divided the body up into the voluntary and involuntary nervous systems. And I taught neuroanatomy starting in the 80s, embodied neuroanatomy. So it's been a long time that I've been teaching it. And there are these nerves that are called the autonomic nervous system and then the somatic nervous system. So it's as if the autonomic isn't somatic, but it is, first of all, of the body. And second of all, going to the muscles and bones is only part of our body. So that somatic nerve pathway, whether it's coming back to the brain or coming in response from the brain, is more volitional. So it kind of sets up another paradigm that the somatic is the volitional and the autonomic is the autonomic, the automatic, the involuntary. And I think this has really screwed us up. Now, on top of that, I always like to cite the book Job's Body by Dean Juhan, Juhan. I'm not exactly sure how he pronounces his name, but when he has a chapter on the nervous system, he talks about it as just one big net. And many of us know the anatomy of Harriet's nerves. Someone did cadaver work and kept every nerve and every part of her brain intact. So the central and peripheral nervous system are visible as one unit. And he made the point, which is true of many things, that it gets named different things for different purposes. So even the brain is named differently, whether you're a anthropologist or a psychologist or a medical doctor. Now there's more blending, but in the beginning, they were just each coming up with different words. So we really have to watch language in general and get rid of sound bites and labeling and have full sentences. So I could imagine for the psychosomatic field, there are those of us that feel like somatic is psychosomatic, and we use the term psychophysical. Our work is psychophysical. And it's movement, and movement is also really important. Like, of course, if I sat still, I'm still moving. My heart's beating, I'm breathing. And so all of that is psychophysical experience. And the changes in my heart rate at the autonomic level and in my breath rate and in my cerebral spinal fluid, all of these rhythms are hugely impactful of behavior. So I am very grateful for having studied body mind centering because she was having us embody all types of tissue, taking time, even though we're supposed to not feel our organs. We all know we feel our organs. When you have pain, you feel your organs. If your stomach's too full, you feel it. You might not know what's what. You don't know it's your finger because you can't see it. But you know, oh, there's something going on in either my kidney, my gallbladder, or my liver, on that right side. Or, my spleen or my kidney, something's a little off in there. Or maybe it's just the muscle on top, but it feels deeper and different. So we have become more like the yogis of the past, where we are able to sense and have some mind body or body mind shifts, or one could call it rehabilitation of these deeper systems of physiology. And that's also why I love the work of Judith Kestenberg, the psychiatrist that worked with babies. And she studied Anna Freud's rhythms and added to them to really explain physiological rhythms and how they impact movement, but also in this work, the psychophysical, to me, leads into the philosophical, which is consciousness. And it's another thing I like very much about the Movementis Conference is we even talk about embryological consciousness there because of the research of Jerry Leisman. So this is a hard paradigm to be holistic, but also be specific. And I feel just like different cultures have different languages. We need to work on what do we do to translate to meet each other inside each other's paradigms. So thank you for that question. Very important. Yeah.
And it's I find that the more collaborations and cross disciplinary conversations are taking place, there is more, there are more shifts that we can recognize in the medical culture that is moving from one size fits none to personalized care, which might sound impossible in given the structures, the systems, and how we perceive, how we might how it might overwhelm us, right? If we think about, okay, now the system needs to change everything in order to fit everybody's needs. But I heard even one psychiatrist who said if we're going to move towards a personalized care in mental health, the system is going to crash.
Mm.
And I thought about it. I still think about it, and what I come to realize is that possibly the understanding of personalized care is not yet grounded in the medical field, such that we can realize that needs don't clash, needs never clash, right? We can have different needs at the same moment, and still we can find a strategy that would, I'm speaking from the prism of nonviolent communication now, and I'm thinking about how we can find a strategy that would work to actually meet everybody's needs. And so I wonder how, because I know that you work also in the field of how dance and movement can assist with in education for peace. And so I'm thinking how this framework that you're coming from can contribute also to personalized care, personalized education.
To me, I feel grateful to have my doctorate in education from Columbia University Teachers College because it was at the forefront of something called differentiated learning. John Dewey was a person who shifted education from being a kind of factory model and to just certain people becoming the creative thinkers or the critical thinkers, and everybody else just sort of learning the same thing so that they behaved like they, without much, I'm not going to say without agency, because everybody has agency, but without much choice, where situations were just, we're not allowing for choice. And so with Dewey, we have this incredible belief in following the child, constructivist learning, setting up situations to create. And honestly, I'm having a very hard time right now because I went to a college explicitly after having been at a high school where we just memorized and passed tests. And I'm very good at memorizing and passing tests, but I knew I wasn't necessarily even going to remember it. And for me, learning is when you remember it, you take it in. So at that point, I was dancing, which is obviously a kind of embodied cognition, learning from the body and through movement to express different moods and personalities and abstractions and storylines. But when I got to college at age 16 and already was exposed to love on movement analysis, it really became clearer and clearer to me that we need to have more of this kind of education that allows for differentiation, different kinds of minds. And actually, when I graduated high school, or as I was graduating, because you have to apply to college before that, I said, I only want to go to a college that has really, truly embodied learning. And the reason I said I'm sad right now is that this school existed, I guess, for 54 years, very new, doesn't have a lot of money, but was part of a project of four other nearby colleges that said we need a forefront to do work in technology and film and cinema. You can imagine in the late 60s, 70s, in political science and organizing. And so that's what this school was, Hampshire College. And just about a month ago, we were told that the school has decided it's going to close. And it's been fragile because it's expensive. It's a private school. And yet the model of learning was about having a question, getting mentorship from the faculty, taking a course if it seemed aligned with your question, your project, and then you got your credit not from taking courses, but from fulfilling projects that you designed with the help of a mentor. And that was really, you do four in the first 2 years, and then another one in the third year, and another one in the fourth year. So 6 projects. Phenomenal for me. I mean, they were formative. I did work with serotonin in 1977, working with sleep patterns. Who was talking about sleep then? Who was talking about serotonin then? I did work comparing the Chinese and Cuban ballet and how being a socialist society in a feminist world shows up in dance. I did projects on childcare. I did projects on analyzing American education and tracking this thing of separating people by level and then giving them this unified learning. So I was so happy when I then went back to graduate school and found a school that had more of the quality of my Hampshire College experience of investigative learning, but also was teaching about differentiated learning. And with AI at this point, I think it's totally possible and easy to have differentiated processes if you're training the AI with the value system and the information that you really want to make sure is in the database. You can absolutely, with nutrition, finally, like no two humans should have the same nutrition exactly. There are some fundamental things that are good, but our biochemistry is different. So to be, and they're already millionaires and billionaires living their lives this way, taking certain pharmaceuticals, but more often bioceuticals that are specific to their genetic needs. And, when you have that much money, you can test your blood every day and see exactly what you need and live forever, perhaps, we'll say. So anyway, I hope that going in those many pathways is somehow inspiration to people to say, yeah, we can do this. And in
So,
mental health, it might be a little harder to rely on AI for sure, and also hands-on work will never be able to be complete. There might be something engineered. I have an engineering friend that said, yeah, we can develop a glove that does different kinds of pressure, and that's already happening. And vibration can be great, but there's another piece with the psychosomatic or what we call somatic, which is the transmission of emotional energies. And so, in the moment of touching, what is the emotion that's coming through as well, not just the vibration? Of course, it is a vibration, but not just a vibration. Yeah.
it's, I think that's what's from what you're saying and from what I've been um, encountering in as both a caregiver for my parents who passed away, but for many years they were in the rehabilitative and then palliative care, and then with myself as someone who is living with the PTSD, I noticed that one of the main things that is missing from the health providers is this awareness of the soma, of the living body, of their soma. And
Mhm.
when I was caring for my parents, I remember as a caregiver, I had this anger in me and this frustration with the system and how they operate and why don't they how come they're not more empathetic. And for I started a PhD at some point at the University of Toronto, and I researched the social determinants of dementia and Alzheimer's, and the public discourse about Alzheimer's and how it affects people living with the condition, their family caregivers, their institutional caregivers, and also policymakers and researchers, and how just the metaphors that are used to discuss the condition are not beneficial for any of the parties because it brings a lot of devastation and tragedy into the framework, and it's very hard to work with it. It's very hard to work towards interventions that are actually beneficial for people. And today, a decade later, I can reflect on it from the somatic perspective, because when I quit my PhD, I couldn't complete it. And when I quit it, I this was the stage when I realized that I needed to do something that is body related. And so this is when I was introduced to contact improvisation and mixed abilities contact improvisation, and then SE and focusing and somatic movement. So this has been a journey for me. And today, as I'm looking at it and also thinking about what is empathy for
Mhm.
care providers, I'm realizing that there is a lot of fear to be empathetic, because there is this, if we don't know how to regulate our nervous system,
Thank you.
it's very it there is danger, right? There is a danger to lose oneself, because we become we not we stop being empathetic. We actually become one with the person we're caring for.
Mhm.
and and how and I think how valuable it is. So I have more empathy towards the care providers who are working in such challenging and
Mhm.
um, yeah, oftentimes devastating conditions because they don't have hope, right? So, and I'm thinking how we can, if the right education, if we had the right education and we had introduced the somatic education into the healthcare um, certificates, right? If this was part of the education, if nonviolent communication was part of the education,
Mhm.
somatic nonviolent communication, embodied nonviolent communication, how we could increase the 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 life quality and the care quality of both the practitioners and the providers and the customers, so to
Yeah.
speak. So yeah.
It's a great vision. And I loved hearing you say, like, even bringing embodiment to nonviolent communication is phenomenal. I got to know Marshall Rosenberg. I got to be in a room with him singing and playing his guitar. And that was embodied. That, just bringing in the arts in that way was just so sweet. And role playing in my own doctoral research, you were asking about that earlier. Um, I chose to focus on the role of physical activity in violence prevention. So it's movement science looking at how does movement either increase or decrease violent responses. So I wasn't talking about war. I was talking about human behavior and movement behavior. But I was in the anthropological milieu of schools. and high schools, middle schools and high schools. So kids 12 to 21. And it just is really great that there are role plays that is embodiment of sorts, but that's still not self-reflective at the body level. It's often self-reflective of the words, like, what did I just say? How do you feel about it? And of course, something we haven't named yet is social emotional learning. I was invited because I had included social emotional learning in my doctoral dissertation and in the work I was learning from educators for social responsibility, teaching conflict resolution. So my goal was, how do we do embodiment and embodied conflict transformation even? And I learned a lot, and I created strategies from the teachers who were doing violence prevention in different kinds of embodied ways. So I'm saying about three things at once. One is there are models now for embodied conflict resolution. I'm not sure how many people that are using that term are really doing the full spectrum of what I believe is important, and that somatic movement educators versus somatic experiencing or somatic psychologists may not use. So, one is the tracking of body sensation in nonverbal communication. So, just we're sitting, we're talking, we're moving, we are alive. And so, what posture are we in? What's our breath rate, as I said before, heart rate? Um, where are we tense? Where are we relaxed? So with that, that's a great beginning. But to me, that's just the beginning. And that's an important somatic piece. But with somatic movement, we're then looking at how does that carry forth into what you do as action, behavior, movement. And what I love is having the Laban-Bartenia framework, because with that, then we're going into anything. It could be sports movement. It could be just talking to a friend while walking. It could be one person touching the other and analyzing that. And when I say analysis, I don't mean a distant analysis. Now, I myself practice authentic movement, which has a witnessing, where you could call that, as a witness, I'm analyzing what I see because I'm bringing it to language, but it's compassionate. So since the 80s, the witnessing that I teach, the observation, the analytic process has always had as least judgment in it as possible. So as compassionate as possible. In other words, for instance, as is becoming more typical in trauma recovery, we had this going way back before even PTSD was true. I mean, it was being named, but the lay public wasn't being exposed to the many concepts of being trauma informed. And even that term, I think, kind of evolved. Um, so those of us in the somatic field were having people have releases, have emotional responses to practicing different movements. And so with that, we're working with maybe some violence that they have experienced, maybe the violence might have been medical, the violence might have been war related, or the violence might have been, and this is very much the case for very, very many people, displacement and being loss of culture. And it could be as a child or as an adult. And so obviously, and then there's other kinds of more interpersonal violence, whether it's abusive or accidental or but not understood to be accidental. So and then there's psychological violence and gaslighting and all of that. So with this paradigm that I teach called the continuum of stress to trauma, and I just taught this for 4 days in Berlin at the Somatic Academy, we really are looking at the physiological responses to different stages in conflict first, and then if conflict becomes violence, and then even looking at when violence is what we would call in dance injury, something more acute or something more chronic. Chronic abuse is obviously much harder to sustain, especially if there's an age or racial or gender differentiation that feels really disempowering. And the resiliency factors have to be really strong when there's that kind of chronic process that somehow somebody isn't becoming an ally and getting you out of, if you're a child, for instance, or as a friend, getting you out of as an adult, or as a therapist, or as a et cetera, et cetera. I think you know all this. So I just felt like when you brought up nonverbal communication, that it has a place in the continuum. And there are two continua. One is stress into violence, and the other is kind of static movement in place versus actually traveling through space and kind of being in a conversation versus doing your whole life moving through space. And the last thing I want to say about this is that with movement and moving through space, with my doctoral studies, the teachers that I picked, because there were very few, so I had to like go broad, were doing physical theater. Some were doing coaching of sports, but teaching kids to be good coaches. So when the fight came up, how did they de-escalate the fight and model good mediation, negotiation skills? Brilliant work, the work of Don Hellison. And then with physical theater, it was groups like Destiny Arts in Oakland, where kids were doing martial arts, drama, and dance. So it really became a storytelling place where they could release trauma of their own, not necessarily identifying it as trauma, but just telling their stories of oppression and doing it through the arts with their whole body, with their voice, with vocal changes, with enacting characters. So you get to be something other than your stuck personality that might still be holding tension and pain. So that's three. We've got martial arts now added, coaching of sports, so sports education, dance education, physical theater. And then the last was somatic education. I did find one teacher who happened to be a dance movement therapist, but was working as a social studies teacher, working with bullying. And she really was using some Lama and Barteniev kinds of activities to help the kids find their bodies in the height of bullying, but also in the breaks away from the bully. Yeah. Mm.
It sounds like, yeah, something that I wish there was more of in our world. This kind of education from young age and throughout the lifespan, and yeah, in different disciplines as well. I find how I miss it in the public sphere, how much it's absent.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There is going to be a book coming out on the role of dance therapy in violence prevention, and some of this will be described there, the bullying work in particular, anti-bullying work. And then Tanya Acaron, living in the UK, I believe, right now, of Puerto Rican descent, also a dance movement therapist, is doing some very nice embodied kinds of peacemaking worth following. Acaron. And she's definitely on Facebook and probably Instagram. Um, so, and she definitely interviewed me in her early stages, and she's really made it her life work. It's something hotel, kind of interesting, maybe Body Hotel or something like that. The Body Hotel.
I time for your knowledge and generosity in sharing your thoughts. It's really precious, and looking forward to meeting you in person in 3D.
Yeah, in 3D. Beautiful. Yeah, likewise. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I imagine I might have been kind of like you when I was younger, but there aren't a lot of people who, I mean, I actually didn't finish my doctorate till I was about 40. Um, I took a long break between my master's, which is in exercise physiology. So that comes in very handy with a lot of the stress reduction work. And actually, my master's thesis was on non-pharmaceutical rehabilitation of hypertension, right? So how do we calm down and get the blood flowing? So anyway, I kind of imagine all the directions you can go in. I'm sure they're going to be wonderful. And I'm very impressed with your resume or CV and what you've accomplished so far. So wishing you all the best. And even the title of your center. By the way, I finally retitled my center so that it could pass the government requirements, and it's called the Center for Embodied Learning. So we have the learning in there, both of us. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
For sure. I think that's one of the things that really helped and still helps me in my rehabilitation, in my palliative rehabilitation, I call it,
Hmm. Hmm.
is the learning, the rehabilitating the learning ability. Also specifically not studying but learning this agency of being a learner, being a participant in the learning processes. So
Hmm. Yeah. And so important for dementia and Alzheimer's, which, by the way, I want to tap into you at some point and what parts of your doctoral research you have written or however you want to share. But I want Moving for Life to have more. We're going to have more fine motor activity. We already have a lot of balance activity. We do teach line dances and choreography. So those are already proven to really help with cognition and ongoing creative cognition. But I want to incorporate more so that as our population is aging, some of the people started with us 20 years ago when we were just volunteering, and now we are a nonprofit, but looking to strengthen. So if you have ideas about,
yes,
and everybody should know that movingforlife.org are free classes online and in person, and that we have teachers all over the world and trainings for them too. So, yeah.
Okay, so this is important information.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah,
Mhm.
and absolutely, I would love to share with you what I found and what I did for my PhD, and we can definitely continue this conversation.
Yeah,
Yes.
I never finished writing a book on my PhD, and you haven't finished writing an article on yours, maybe. So we can
No,
encourage each other. Did you publish a
yeah,
little bit?
yes, I have with Amy Clements Cortez.
Uh-huh.
She's a music therapist, and she was working in still is working among other things in end of life care. And
Mhm.
so I did publish an article with her, but I didn't finish the dissertation. I didn't start the dissertation.
As
So
long as your knowledge is getting out there, that's excellent. Yeah.
yes,
And then people can read Dynamic Embodiment. And so my websites are both there, dynamicembodiment.org and marthaeddy.com. So the drmarthaeddy.com, actually, drmarthaeddy.com. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
wonderful.
So
Thank you so much.
see you either online or in person soon, I hope. Yeah,
Yes, thank
great.
you.
Ciao. Thank you. Have a great evening.
You have a great day. Bye bye.